Welcome to the Kingdom Podcast, featuring Commissioner Christine King, where all voices are heard.
Welcome to the Kingdom Podcast, where all voices are heard. I am your host, Christine King, Commissioner from the City of Miami, District 5, and also the Chairwoman of the City of Miami Commission. I am joined here today. I'm honored to have today as my guest Miss Bea Hines, who is a columnist with the Miami Herald, but has had a storied career and was also nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. I had the honor of reading her column celebrating her 87th birthday, and I was moved to tears by that column. And we are celebrating International Women's Month, and I just thought it would be awesome to have you as a guest on the Kingdom Podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
As I just said, I read your column, and it really moved me to tears. And I wanted to share your story with our listeners and our viewers so that I could share your story. I felt like it was so inspirational. Can you tell us how you got to be where you are today?
Well, first of all, the podcast isn't long enough. We don't have enough time.
That is true.
But I'm a woman who believes in the Lord, and I pray over everything. Even when I write a column, I pray and ask God to give me something to write that will be inspirational, that will inspire someone, or maybe get somebody up out the dumps and say, okay, if she did it, I could do it. And the only thing I can tell you is that the Lord had a plan for me, and I didn't always follow it, but when I did start to follow His plan, the blessings start to come. And I don't mean monetary blessings. I'm not a rich person, but I'm rich in a lot of other ways. I'm rich because I have a family. I'm rich because I have a church family. I'm rich because I'm a grandmother and I'm a great-grandmother. Mm-hmm. I'm rich because God blessed me to become a mother. I had 2 sons. My oldest son died. Will be 12 years this year. Mm-hmm. But the Lord has brought me through many things, especially when we came to Miami when I was 6 years old. And this was my neighborhood. I'm sitting in my neighborhood.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yes.
Isn't that wonderful?
It is.
You became a journalist when there weren't many black journalists, much less black women journalists. What was that like for you, being in that room?
Well, first of all, when I became a journalist, it was by accident because, well, it wasn't accidental to the people who hired me, but they forgot to tell me that I was working at the Miami Herald in the library as a file clerk, and I was studying journalism at night at Miami-Dade, and sometimes I had classes in the day, and I also wrote for the Falcon Times. That was a newspaper for the college at the time. And I was so proud of my writing that I would share my stories with 2 good friends in the newsroom. One was worked as the she was the co-editor of the women's department. That's what they call later it became Living Today, and then Just Living. It became a featured section. But her name was Helen Corman. Helen and I were the same age. She came to Miami from Mississippi, and she was a tall, beautiful woman who, her mother, only child, her mom dressed her beautifully. She sent her the most beautiful clothes, and back then we all dressed up to go to work. And the other person was Juanita Green, the late Juanita Green. And Juanita was about 10 years older, but she was a mentor. And she took some of my articles to the managing editor, who was Larry Jinks at the time. And she said to him, she later told me, she told him, well, you are looking for a black reporter, and you have Bea in the library, and she could write. And so that's how I got the job.
Wow.
And but prior to my becoming a reporter, there was another young man who was a reporter, black man, who was my dear friend from childhood. His name was Thurley Smith, and he is the late brother of Congresswoman Frederica Wilson.
Really?
Yes, I knew them. We grew up as children, and I knew Thurley and I were very good, close. We were very good friends. And this was they hired Thurley at the beginning of, I believe, at the end of 1967. I was still in the library, and I was so happy when he came to work. He had been teaching in D.C., and because things were getting tense in Miami at the time, in fact, all over the country. And so Garth Reeves, who was with the publisher of the Miami Times, talked to the editor about hiring him, the managing editor, about hiring Thurley as a reporter. So he became the first black reporter for the Miami Herald. And then a few months later, they hired a young black man named Granville Reed. And at that time, there were so many news outlets that were looking for black people, especially in the South. So he went to work. He left the Miami Herald after a few months and went to work for a television station in Tampa. So that left only Thurley. And then the 1968 riot started. I don't remember what caused that riot, but there was a disturbance. It wasn't very big, and Thurley had to cover it, and he didn't like it at all. He didn't like the racism in the newsroom. He didn't like the way he was treated in the newsroom. I mean, it was blatant racism. And so finally one day he came to the library and he said, "Bea, I'm leaving." And I was so crushed. I said, "If you leave, we won't have any black representation in the newsroom." He said, "Bea, I can't take it anymore. I can't take the racism." And so I gave him my blessing. We stayed in touch. He went back to the school board. And now we are without a black reporter at all. And so then I stepped up. But the night before I started my job, actually I was called, this was June 1st, the first week, Monday in June, 1970. And I was on my day off from working in the library. And one of my friends called me. I was the only black in there, and she befriended me. And she was an older woman, and she said, "B," and she was so angry with me. She said, "Why didn't you tell me you're going to be a reporter?" And I said, "Hazel, don't believe that lie. That's not true. You know that's not true. I would have told you." She says, "It's all over the newsroom. Everybody knows it." And I said, "Oh, my goodness. Well, give me Lewis's phone number," who was our supervisor, who was off on the same day. And I wanted to call him and when I did get him, I said, "Lewis, don't believe the lie that's circulating." I said, "I'm not going to be a reporter." He says, "Yes, you are."
Oh.
And I said, "What?" And so he said to me, Friday he was called over to Larry Jenks's office to talk about me and my potential as a reporter. And he said he gave me a rave review. And I was so thankful to him. But I didn't want him to think that I had been looking for another job without first consulting him, because he had been so helpful and when I was going to school, he would let me, if I could get my classes in the daytime, he would have me work at night. So that's how we worked. But can I back up a minute?
Absolutely.
Before I became a reporter, and while I was working going to school at Miami-Dade, I met a man named Fred Shaw. He was the vice president of Miami-Dade, and he was also the book editor of the Miami Herald. So on the nights that I worked, he would come in. So happened he would come in on those nights to pick up the books to review. And we became friends. And he asked me one time what was I studying. And I told him I was going to be a teacher. Meanwhile, I asked him to read one of my papers that I had to turn in. And he said, "What did you say you're going to be? You're studying?" I said, "Well, I'm going to be a teacher." He said, "Well, you need to change your major to journalism." And I laughed at him. I said, "They're not going to hire me. I'm black and I'm a woman." And he didn't laugh. He said, "B, things are changing in this country, and you need to be ready for the change."
Wow.
And so when it was time, school started the next semester, I changed my major to journalism.
I read that in your column, but your mother would not have been.
No.
She would not have been happy with that. She wanted you to have a traditional career, be
That's
a teacher or a nurse, and you
Especially
didn't.
nurse.
And you didn't tell her.
I couldn't, because by that time I was already a young widow with these two little boys, and my mother and I lived together, and I needed her to watch them at night when I went to school. And I knew she always thought I was this dreamer. You know, she never put any of my artwork up. She never read any of the poems I wrote. And when I got a scholarship in voice, she didn't let me take it.
Oh.
So, because she thought, well, what are you going to do? You can't be. There's only one Marian Anderson, who was one of my idols. I just love her, and I got to speak to her when I became a reporter. But at that time, she was ill and she didn't feel like talking.
Oh.
And she said, when I feel better, if you can call me back, and I'll be happy to let you interview me. But just hearing her voice was such a blessing to me. But yeah, my mom, just bless her heart, she loved me, and I knew she loved me. And she thought she was doing the best thing for me.
Right.
Because she didn't want me to be disappointed. She knew how she grew up, and she hadn't seen very much change. We still lived in segregated areas. You know, the signs in the grocery stores over the water fountains and in other public places, whites, over the fountain water fountain was white only. And then they had colored, not black, colored.
Colored, yes.
And then we had the signs in the public transportation, the buses. The signs up on the walls of the bus said colored seat from rear. So she hadn't seen any changes, and so she didn't want me to be hurt, and she tried to shield me from that. But being the bee that I am, I found a way to get around it.
Well, thank God for that.
But
thank God
it was so funny, because when I became a reporter and I told her that I was going to be a reporter, she was so shocked. But she took all the credit.
Of course.
And
of
it was
course.
okay, because I couldn't have done it without her.
Exactly. And for that, you paved the way for other people that look like us to follow your example, your lead, that we can be we can have a seat at every table.
That's right.
At every table, which allowed me to be where I am because of trailblazers like you. Another point that I will never forget, in your article, you said, be better, not bitter.
That's right.
Be better, not bitter. And I love that. And lately, I've been getting that same message all over. Like, it's just quiet little messages. Be better, not bitter. And I'm so grateful. I read your column. It was the last thing I read before I went to sleep one night. And I text my PR person to say, I would love to interview you on my podcast for International Women's Month, because that article touched me so.
I'm so glad.
It really moved me to tears. It really moved me to tears. And I'm so happy that you said yes to come on my little podcast.
On my writing day at that.
And I know how important your writing day is, because I, too, that's one of my creative outlets. I'm writing a novel.
Okay.
And I'm midway point through it. And again, these lessons just come my way. And yesterday, I listened to something that said, you have to dedicate your time to writing and don't let anything interfere with your writing. You schedule it, you block it out. So I am thankful that you came on your writing day, because I know what a big sacrifice that is, that you have to get the word out. And as, because I was raised by a single mother, it's me, my brother, and my sister, and a lot of what I did was considered, you're doing what? I remember telling my mom and my dad that I'm going to go to law school. And they were like, okay. Because I was not a traditional student. I didn't go to college right after high school, and you know, I went to Miami-Dade College. At the time, was community college for 9 years. And
Sounds like me.
I'm proud of that, because
yeah.
then I got my undergraduate degree from Barry University and my law degree from Nova Southeastern University. But your story so inspired me. Because we can't stop being inspired, right?
That's true.
Every day.
I'm inspired every day by someone or something, and I think you need to live that way. You can't ever think that you know it all, or that you've learned it all, or you've seen it all.
Right.
You know, now my friends laugh now. When I was 86 and a half, I started counting like 86 and 3/4 of a year. That's how old I am. And then we got down to the day of my birthday. So now I'm 87 and almost a month.
That's so.
But when you live this long, you have to make your life count for something. You know, I never thought that I was leaving a legacy of any kind. I just wanted to do something that would make somebody else feel good, make somebody else's life better, make my own children make their lives better, and then the children who looked up to me, to let them know that they can do this. They can be whatever they want to be. I cracked this it wasn't a glass ceiling, but I got into this profession when there were not that many black people, a few black people in the South. Peggy Peterman, the late Peggy Peterman, was working as a reporter at the St. Pete Times when I was still in the library. Mm-hmm. And she got her break because she worked at the paper almost the same way I did. But Peggy was an attorney. Mm. She was an attorney and a very fine writer, very fine woman who passed several years ago.
Wow.
So you do. Let me back up a minute. When I was studying journalism, and my youngest son Sean was in kindergarten, and Ricky was in the first grade, and I would drop Sean off to kindergarten, and one of the teachers who was my classmate, we went to all through high school together, very good friend of mine, and she said, "B, so what are you studying?" And I said, I'm studying journalism. And the other teacher was standing next to her, who was the head of the school, and she was a distant relative, and she just broke out laughing. And she said, she laughed right in my face. She said, "Girl, where do you think you're going to get a job as a journalist in Miami?" And I remember what Fred Shaw told me. He said, "B, things are changing." And I repeated the same words to her. I said, "Things are changing, and I'm going to be ready for the change." And so when I became a reporter, I think it was maybe about a couple of years later, she was the first one to call me and to congratulate me and to thank me. But I learned something from that. Some people would have maybe think, well, maybe I shouldn't try this, So I learned not to tell people my dreams. I didn't tell my mother. So people would ask me, I said, "I'm getting an education." Mm-hmm. And every now and then my mother would ask me, "What did you say you're going to be?" I said, "Mom, I'm getting an education." I didn't want to lie to her.
Right.
So I was getting an education. That was the truth. But she did not know that I was studying journalism until I got the job.
And you have to do that because everybody's not praying for you to succeed.
That's so true.
Everybody's not praying for your success, so you have to keep it close to your vest, or just share it with those people that no matter what you say, no matter
they're going to be encouraging.
They're going to encourage you, no matter, because I know I've had some harebrained ideas, one of which was to become an elected official to serve the community, and there are bumps and bruises that come along with that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, it's good work.
Yes.
Because we're helping, I'm serving, and I will take with me forever, be better, not bitter.
No, thank you.
I will take that with me throughout my journey. And I know that when you started and you became a reporter, you didn't think you were a trailblazer. You were just working.
I was a widow with 2 children. I needed to work. Mm-hmm. And then when they gave me the job as a reporter on a trial basis, 3 months trial basis, and Larry Jenks said, "If it doesn't work out, you have to go back to the library." And I said, "That's fine." And so this is on the first week of June. And he said, well, you'll start in 2 weeks on the 15th. And I said, well, can I start on the 16th? So I would like to keep my same day off. And he said, okay, we could work that out. But I didn't know, so I'm getting ready and preparing. He was preparing the newsroom, because at that time, the newsroom was just white men mostly. I think there were four white women in the newsroom. The rest worked in the women's department. You know, they did recipes and features on clubs and stuff like that. Light stuff. They didn't think women could really do hard stuff, but they had Juanita Green in the newsroom. She was a hard news reporter. And then they had Joy Reese Shaw, who used to cover the schools at the time. And I forgot the other two women. There was one woman editor. Her name was Rose Allegado, and the rest were men. And so he had to prepare the men for my coming, okay? And so when I came in that morning on the 16th, I didn't know anything about a riot. And I walked in the door, and I'm all dressed up like Brenda Starr in the comic strip, you know. And I walked in the newsroom. I'm so proud, but I'm so scared because I don't know what to expect. And Larry Jenks meets me, and he says, B, there's a riot in Liberty City. I just came from Liberty City. He said, would you be afraid to cover it? And I'm saying in my mind, I don't know if any of you all are old enough to know what Brer Rabbit was, who Brer Rabbit was. Did you know about the Uncle Remus stories?
I had heard of Brer Rabbit. I don't know that I could.
He lived in the briar patch, and the fox was always trying to trick him, but Brer Rabbit would always tell him, throw me in the briar patch. Please don't throw me in the briar patch, because he knew that's where the fox would throw him. So when he said that to me, I'm saying in my mind, is Brer Rabbit scared of the briar patch? And because Liberty City was where I lived.
Right. So
I thought, okay, I can do this. And so I had no credentials. I didn't have a press card. I didn't even have nothing. I had nothing to show that I was a reporter. And so I went out on the street. They didn't want any black people, any people, period, on the street. And so I went up to every police car that I saw. I told them who I was, and I gave him Larry Jenks' phone number. And I said, if you need to verify me, just call Larry Jenks at the Miami Herald. I don't know if they ever did. But anyway, the very first, I was walking down the 62nd Street, and I hear this man saying to another man, he was sitting on a crate in the doorway, man, this riot is hurting my business. And I'm thinking, he was a young man, very young man. And I backed up. I had walked a few steps, and I said, excuse me, sir, and I told him who I was, and he looked at me like, who you think you fooling? You're not a reporter. But anyway, I said, I'm working for the Miami Herald. I'm covering the riot. And what is your business? Why is the riot hurting your business? And he looked at me kind of sideways. He said, I'm a hustler. And I thought, okay, he meant he was a pimp. He had women on the street, and the riot, he couldn't get them out there because the riot was stopping it.
Oh, wow.
So he called himself Iceberg Slim. And I didn't have any better sense than to go back to the Herald and tell him that I had a story. I didn't even know if they would run it. And Larry said, okay, go write it. And they gave me a desk and a manual typewriter. And I sat down and I wrote a little story that was about 8 inches long. And to my surprise, they ran it on the front page of the paper the next morning.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
So my very first story, I was so excited.
Did you save it?
You know what? I spoke last week to some people in North Miami Beach at a luncheon, and a man was there who found that article. Somehow he went online and sent it to me.
Oh.
So I have a copy of it now.
I would love to read it.
I'll send it to you.
I would love to read it.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
So we've gotten to a place in my podcast where I ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
And you just, whatever comes on top of your head. Do you have a favorite book?
Well, I have several favorite books. One of them that, well, of course, I read the Bible every day. That's my favorite. I read. I've been reading every day. I read a proverb, a chapter in Proverbs, because, it's like 31 chapters, and there's a chapter for every day. So I try to read.
I might pick that up. Yeah. I have read Proverbs before. Yeah. That you can manage. it's
some of the
tough
stuff
to
you
read the
don't
Bible.
understand. It is tough.
It's tough
and
to
I
read
don't
the
say
Bible.
that I understand everything that I read, but before I read, I always ask God to help me to understand what He is saying to me through His Word.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that helps. And the other book that this has become a recent favorite. When I was writing in '72, I've been writing 2 years. When they hired 9 other black reporters, and in that bunch was one editor. Her name was Wanda. At that time, her maiden name was Wanda Smalls. She married a guy named Lloyd, and she became a managing editor of a paper in Alabama before she retired. And she wrote a book called Coming Full Circle from Jim Crow to Journalism. That has been my favorite book recently.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I recommend that you read it. It's a wonderful book. She's a good storyteller.
Okay.
And we're still in touch. I spent a couple of some June before last. I went up. We hadn't seen each other in many years, and I spent a week with her. And she lives in Savannah now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite song or a theme song?
Yes. You when you mentioned something about the trials that we go through, getting to where we are. And I didn't tell you about the time that that they sent me to the dump for a story, the county dump. And there was nothing there. They were playing games with me. And I had to get a song to sing all the way back downtown. I don't remember what that one was. But one of my very favorite songs, because of where God has brought me, how He's brought me, and how faithful He has been to me, is Great Is Thy Faithfulness.
Oh, I love that song.
I love that song.
I love that song.
Yeah. The words speak to me.
Yes, I love that. I have it on my playlist because several people have sung it. It's a man that's on my playlist that his voice is so booming. It is beautiful,
It's
beautiful song. That's a beautiful
It's a song that I sang when my son, who passed, and he passed, will be 12 years this year. Before he died, he had become a minister. And at when he preached his first sermon, he said, "Mom, I want you to sing." Oh. And that's the song that I sang, because great is thy faithfulness. God is so faithful.
Yes.
Because that is the son I thought I would be having to visit in jail. You know, he just had that kind of attitude. You know, I just thought something was going to happen to him. But God turned his life around.
Yeah, I love that song. I love music, period.
I do too.
When I was going door to door, I would listen to music, and one of my favorite songs was He Knows My Name.
Oh, I love that. Yes,
and
I love that
would listen to that song. I would sing that song as I was going door to door, because I knocked on like 5,000 doors in the district by myself. I had just security with me that, made sure they were driving me, because I would get out, and they made sure I was safe. But it was my job before all the teams started, and that song would keep me motivated. That song would keep me motivated. And my other song, because I love hip hop, when I would feel a little anxious also, or people coming at you, I would listen to I Ain't Never Scared. I Ain't Never Scared. And those songs would just carry the day. So I know how important, like, having a theme song or a song that just lifts you up.
Oh yeah, I have many songs that lift me up. When I was in high school, and we had a teacher, our music teacher, Leela Williams, I always said she could have been another Marian Anderson. And she taught us to love the classics and taught us to sing arias from opera.
Yes.
And when I was 8 years old, I was singing Summertime, and some of the teachers they would have the little talent shows in the class, and they would, well, how did you know about that song? How did you know about that? But I always listened to the opera on Saturday from the Avery Fisher Music Hall.
Oh, wow.
I would listen to that while I was doing my chores on Saturdays. And I would sing along with them.
Oh.
Sometimes I didn't know what
they were saying. Yes.
That's right, but I had listened long enough that I could sing along with them.
Oh. If you could have dinner with anyone, living or dead, who would you want to break bread with?
Okay. Well, now, because I'm a woman of faith, it's going to be the Lord. That's one of them. The other person I would love to have dinner with and just sit down with her, there are two women. That's Eleanor Roosevelt and Mary McLeod Bethune.
Wow.
I would love. They were friends, and I would love to know how they came together, and what was about their lives that made them see something in each other.
That would be.
In fact, I did get a chance to see Miss Bethune, Dr. Bethune, Mary McLeod Bethune, before she passed.
Wow.
I was 16, and I was singing in the choir, and they were having a convention, a Methodist women convention here in Miami, and we were singing over at the old Ebenezer Methodist Church, United Methodist Church, which is now a community center on 10th Street and 10th Street and 3rd Avenue. That's where we were.
Wow. Wow.
I can never forget seeing this little, I thought she was a bigger woman. She was tiny.
Was she?
And she was wearing a black dress. I will never forget her.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you could give your younger self advice, what would it be?
When I was younger, although I had all these dreams, I didn't think sometimes that they would come true. And I always felt that maybe I wasn't good enough. And but I don't know where I got this from. But one day I woke up and I felt like I was good enough. I would tell my younger self to grab hold of that earlier in life, because it's important to think that to know that you're somebody and you're good enough.
Amen.
It's very important.
Amen. Amen.
Can I tell you this little story?
Yes.
Do you have enough time?
I do.
Okay. I had some wonderful mentors in school. I had a homeroom teacher, Mr. James Wanzer, the late James Wanzer, was wonderful. He was like a father to all of us. And then there were I had a teacher who was a mentor, a wonderful mentor to me, Marion Shannon, who died maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. She was just a wonderful person and was the one who encouraged me with my writing. But then there was another teacher, and not every teacher is going to be kind to you and understand what you're trying to do. And she was my language arts teacher. She gave us a list of stories to write, topics to write on. And my topic was the beauty around us. And I always loved it. When I went to the beach, Virginia Key Beach, I would always wander off and look at the plants and try to, and shells and stuff. And I found beauty in all of that. And so the day we were supposed to turn it in, we were in homeroom, and I had forgotten to do my homework. So I hurried up and I wrote my essay while other people were, having fun in homeroom. I was doing my because she was my first period. So when, and don't you know, she called on me to read mine because she didn't think I would have it.
Oh.
And I got up and I read it, and she said, "That's very nice. And what book did you get it from?" And I was both insulted and proud.
Right.
And then one of my friends who just passed last year, she was a Dr. Richardson. She said, "Oh no, she didn't get that from a book. She just wrote that in homeroom." She was throwing me under the bus, and she thought she was helping me.
Right.
But anyway, I spoke at her funeral, and I told that little story about her. But yeah, some teachers don't see the good in you or see that you could become. My mother was a maid, and she didn't think that I would become anything. But I did. By the time she was, when we were celebrating our 20th anniversary at Booker T, our class had been out of school for 20 years. And then they asked me to be the speaker for our alumni day. And she came.
Wow.
But she never wanted to speak to me. I think she was embarrassed because she lived to see me become a reporter. And she was the one who told me that I got my essay from a book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I understood. It was okay.
Yeah, because we do it in spite of.
That's right.
We succeed
better.
in spite of.
That's right.
Those who couldn't see the vision.
I could have been bitter.
But you were better.
I became better.
But you were better.
Yes.
I love that. Well, thank you for being a guest on the Kingdom Podcast, and thank you for inspiring us as women, and your story will just ripple out. It will just ripple out.
Well, thank
and
you.
I'm so proud to have had you on my show and for you to be the guest for International Women's Month.
Well, I'm so thankful that you even wanted me, you know. Sometimes when people get old and they start telling the same story, so people get tired of hearing it.
Not at all.
She's going to tell that story again.
Not at all.
I got a lot of them. I got a lot of stories.
And you should tell them all. You should tell them all.
And I love telling my stories. I do.
We learn, but that's how we learn.
Yeah.
That's how we learn.
Yeah.
So thank you again. Thank you for listening or watching another episode of the Kingdom Podcast. It's a wrap.